Welcome back. Now, MIPCOM is the place where all the big entertainment groups want to make the news and announce new deals and shows. And I'm delighted to be joined by Andy Fry from MIPCOM News to give us the latest scoop on all the latest developments coming out of this year's event in News from the Floor. Welcome to the show, Andy. How are you doing?
Hi, Justin. Very good, thank you. How are you?
I'm great. And this is our first live stream, so it's very exciting. And we've had a great lineup of guests so far. We've had SpongeBob SquarePants and...
Excellent. Well, I hope I can follow that.
Yeah, well, that's it. Yeah, you've got big boots to fill.
Exactly.
As I said in the intro, lots of news is announced at MIPCOM and lots of journalists scouring the Palais for the latest stories. Can you give us a sense of what news stories that have come out in the market so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's still relatively early days. We're halfway through day one, so it's like half time, in a football match, just waiting to know the final score. A lot of people have just started their meetings today, so there aren't a huge amount of announcements. But I would say I'm off to a session about scripted formats in about 20 minutes, and there've been a couple of scripted format deals. So I think that's an interesting area because one of the big themes about the market is people playing it safe, people being risk averse, and I think scripted formats plays into that. So there's a Japanese format called Mother, which has been very successful over the last 3 or 4 years, and it's just done another deal, I think, in Greece. And perhaps a bigger story is All 3 Media's Liar, which was originally a UK show, and that's now got 15 deals. It's just done a deal with Botswana, which again shows the durability of that format, but also the fact that it can play out in Botswana shows that it's also quite scalable as a format. So I think scripted formats is an interesting area.
Yeah, and so when you say about less risk-averse strategies,
more risk-averse.
Sorry,
yeah,
more risk-averse. Essentially, that is benefiting probably the bigger distribution groups who have got proven formats that have sold internationally already.
Yeah, I mean, it manifests itself in a number of ways. I mean, obviously, big groups tend to do well in tough times. I mean, for example, people buy their catalogue. So there's been a big shift towards catalogue sales as opposed to commissions over the last year, and I think it kind of manifests itself in the way that franchises are being extended. So again, I mean, I was thinking about, if you look at the front of the magazine, there's Suits LA. So Suits is a franchise that ran very successfully, and now NBCU have brought Suits LA. So it's an example of a reboot of a show that they know can work well, and they're bringing it back with a bit of a dust-up. You've got Warner Brothers Discovery who are here, and they've got The Penguin, which is obviously an extension of the whole Batman franchise. And you've got The Physician, Beta Film from Germany, made a great product called The Physician about 10 years ago, and now they're making The Physician too. So I think that's another way of being risk-averse. It doesn't mean that the quality is poor. The quality of these productions is very high, but if you can go back into a pre-existing franchise, it's a way of just taking some of the fear out of the market for buyers.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So we might be starting to see the return of lots of seasons or series, should I say, that we perhaps assumed that that they've been dead and buried, but they're back from the dead in many cases.
Everyone is minding their catalogues. I mean, I think scripted formats, it's quite a difficult thing to do, so there perhaps aren't as many in the market as you might expect. I mean, when one happens, there tends to be a lot of noise around it, and it gives the impression it's a very big scalable market. Yeah. But I definitely think scripted formats is in vogue at the moment. People are having conversations, and I definitely think the reboot of franchises. And I suppose the other area which is similar is the notion of, I mean, everyone keeps talking about this as the age of collaboration. So more co-production, more co-financing, and relationships you would never have imagined 5 or 10 years ago, they're in vogue now. And I think there was one I read about this morning, which was announced in market, was Beta Film coming up with a production deal with Globo in Brazil. So 2 very big, powerful, influential players. But I wouldn't historically have thought of Beta and Globo as being obvious partners, but clearly they've found a way to make that work. So I think that kind of collaboration is the other thing that plays into this, playing it safe, risk aversion, but while still wanting to deliver the best quality you can.
Yeah. Well, we're going to be talking about co-production with our first panel in about 15 minutes, so that'll be a good opportunity to delve into that in a little bit more detail. So I saw ITV Studios had made a number of announcements today, haven't they? On the Monday morning of the market. One of which was a new digital label that they've announced.
Yeah, so Zoo 55, that's an interesting development. I think there's been a sense for a while that digital first content in the world of YouTube and so on is separate and distinct from traditional format. But actually, the two groups are moving much closer together. So we've seen Banijay get into this area already, and now ITV Studios talking about taking its existing content and getting it out into those platforms. And actually, just before I came on air, I was talking to Millimage, who are a French animation studio, well-established studio, and I was asking them, YouTube is so important in the kids market now, and I was asking them what they were doing. So one of their big properties, Malang, is being given a digital spin-off, and they're also beginning to look at the possibility for the first time of testing new IP in the social platform space. And then maybe if it works, if it gets the right kind of momentum and resonance, taking that out to broadcasters to see if that can work. So I think those old those old kind of suspicions about relationships between the two markets are definitely breaking down quite rapidly now.
Yeah, that's really interesting to see. And actually, Zoo 55 and the team from ITV Studios are going to be part of the digital content forum on Tellycast that we're running on the 7th of November at the BFI South Bank. So, if you want to hear more about that, then please come along. So, what about some of the keynotes, Andy? The starting to I think it's this afternoon, the first major ones.
Yeah, there'll be a few of them happening this afternoon. I think there's All 3 Media's Jane Turton. That'll be interesting because they've been taken over by a company called Redbird, which will be interesting to see whether that comes with investment, new opportunities, new production possibilities. We've got Channing Dungay from Warner Brothers Discovery, who's a really interesting exec. She'll be talking about their slate, which is a kind of combination of big scripted pieces like The Penguin, which I mentioned, and also formats. So one of their big formats at the moment is The Golden Bachelor, which they've spun off into another show called The Golden Bachelorette, and it's another example of the format side, although on the non-scripted side. So they've sold The Golden Bachelor, I think, into about 10, 15 countries now as a format. So that's done well for them. And then later in the day, Sony are here, and Sony are very interested. It's Tony Vinciquerra. And they're a very interesting company because, to a large extent, they stayed out of the streaming wars.
Yeah.
So while the big players were all getting caught up in this walled garden, how to protect the content, how to fleece us for as much money as they could,
how to be
Sony
a consumer brand, basically, wasn't it? They've all struggled with, but Sony stayed out of that.
Sony stayed out of that. I mean, they have Crunchyroll, which is a streamer, so they're not averse to having the right streamer and the right business model. But for the most part, they said, actually, we're a program supplier, and it's better for us to be able to go out and sell to 5, 10 different companies rather than blocking ourselves in. And I think that kind of connects in a way to Evan Shapiro was talking this morning at the AI Summit. And he's very, Evan is a really interesting character with some very upfront views. And he was basically saying that this walled garden approach is pretty much a failure for the big players, that what they need to be doing is finding a way to combat big tech. All the ad revenue has gone into 3 companies. Basically, it's Meta and Amazon and Google. And the walled garden approach has disintermediated the data that the TV companies have and made it more difficult for them to compete. So he's arguing for a kind of a radical collaboration, a way that they bring their data together and actually find a unified way of combating the real threat, which is big tech, as opposed to each other.
Yeah, and it's interesting with Sony, isn't it? Because as you say, they stayed out of that, but they seem to do very well. As a result of staying out of that and without spending billions on a new platform.
I think so. I think again, we spoke to Tony Vinciquerra before the market, and he said exactly that. In his time in charge, they've grown the business every year for about the last 5 years. And obviously it's been a difficult time. But I do think, if you stay out of the streaming business, as they've done to a large extent, you can sell to a lot of customers. And you also don't get caught up in this thing about whether you have to put your own content on your own platform. You can just get out and sell, you can keep your third-party distribution piece going as well. And that's, companies like All 3 Media are in a similar kind of position. Fremantle, there are lots of quite big players here who are actually kind of saying, told you so. We're producing, we're co-financing, we're distributing without having got caught up in the streamer wars, which, have been hideously expensive for the big players.
Yeah, absolutely. So how about later on in the week, Andy? What are you looking forward to? What are the announcements that we can expect later on in the week? And how does it usually work when it comes to news being announced during the market? Because in many cases, you see an enormous amount of press releases happening at the same time, and obviously journalists have got to trawl through them, find out which ones are actually interesting to the marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is that a lot of people come to market with pre-prepared information. They want to hit very big on the Sunday and Monday, so they issue news about deals. So they come and they say we've sold this to 20 countries or 30 countries. So there's been some of that. Then they get into the live meetings. So they've kind of come with their pre-prepared announcements. They then come into their live meetings, and that's not necessarily going to facilitate news straight away, because it could be the beginning of a meeting that then requires follow-up at a later stage. And everybody in the business is talking about how decision making is really slow at the moment. It takes time for people to actually get things to completion. So possibly they'll agree something, and then there'll be due diligence, and it might be that the actual deal doesn't happen until 2 or 3 weeks later, or even at the next market. I mean, there's one interesting non-scripted example which I was thinking about is another Japanese show called Old Enough. And Old Enough is actually a format that Nippon TV first brought to MIPCOM about a year ago, presented, and then it got on Netflix in its original form, and then it got picked up by TVO in Canada. So sometimes it's you just have to kind of take a breath, get your content out there, start telling people about it, and sometimes you get a break, like Netflix showing the program, and then that leads to a deal, and then today they announced a renewal, a second season for TVO. So it can be an ongoing process. So yeah, I think you have to be careful not to get too caught up in the immediate deal making. Although of course, there'll be announcements.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So, Andy, well, thank you so much for spending time with us. I mean, I know that you're rushing to and from meetings and sessions and writing.
You've got my daily steps.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Well, thanks a lot for joining us. We'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow as well for more news from the floor.
No problem.
Okay, we're going to take a short break before we kick off our first Tellycast panel session of MIPCOM 2024. We'll be discussing the increasingly important world of co-production in TV drama with Kate Barnes, SVP of Global Content Scripted at ITV Studios, Richard Tulkhart from Buccaneer, and Pablo Conde, Director General of Internationalization at ISEX. We'll see you shortly.